Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a doozy. Today, I have 3 stories that nearly shattered everyone involved as they tried to rationalize what happened to them. Just wait until you hear what you're about to hear. So, if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Let us know you're out there and smash that subscribe button so we can always be together. Thanks. Now, let's get into the stories. So, I have to tell you about this wild thing that happened to me last June. I was so spooked by the whole thing that I actually put my mountain cabin up for sale. I just can't see myself feeling safe there again. I've always loved vacationing in Colorado, especially the Rocky Mountains. So much of it is untouched, and I'm a big fan of nature. Over the years, I've seen all sorts of wildlife like elk, mountain lions, bears, deer, even a few bobcats. But I've never been scared for my life until this past summer. My cabin is located near a lake in the Rockies, close to the Colorado River. I go there by myself to chill out at least 3 times a year. During the winter, it's a bit tricky as you have to drive in on the rough mountain roads, and they aren't plowed in the winter. I've even snowshoed in a few times, but it's pretty tiring. These days, I tend to just go when I can drive all the way in. So I went up there in June and I had a great week, bird watching and hiking, listening to coyotes howl at night. And near the end of my stay, I decided to hike a trail that led to an overlook of the Colorado River Valley. It was marked as difficult in the hiking guide, but I was up for a new experience. And boy, did I get a new experience. The trail was a bit rougher than I had realized, overgrown with thorny bushes and fallen trees blocking the way. The amount of debris on the trail made me think that no one had used it for a long time. I got to the first stream crossing and I saw a fawn and a doe, which cheered me up and gave me a second wind. I then filled my water bottle and kept going, knowing I wouldn't find any more water further on. The last part of the trail involved steep rock faces, but according to the guidebook, you didn't need climbing gear. There were enough handholds and footholds that a relatively fit person could navigate the boulders. I passed by a few large flat rocks that looked like a good place to eat lunch on the way down, and I made a mental note for them later. By the time I reached the top, I was sweating, but I felt like a champ, up there above the tree line and looking down at the Colorado River Valley. The breeze felt good, cooling me down, but there was this awful smell carried on the wind. It smelled like something had died nearby. I looked around to find the source and I spotted a bit of fur visible within the tangle of undergrowth. I walked over to look, and I was shocked at what I saw. It was the remains of a deer. Its head was intact, the eyes still wide open in fright. The legs and hooves were still recognizable, but my stomach turned as I viewed the rest. The entire torso had been ripped apart, and all that was left was a hollow rib cage. I felt sick looking down at it, and I backed away quickly. It ruined my enjoyment of the overlook, so I decided to get away from the smell and climb back down to the flat rocks. At that point, lunch was the last thing on my mind, but I thought it would be nice to sit there and think about my trip. Within 10 minutes, I had descended to the rock field and I chose a nice flat spot. I sat cross-legged and I turned my face up to the sun, trying to savor the last bit of vacation that I had. Suddenly, I heard a crashing in the bushes above me. I was startled because it sounded like something really big. I craned my neck to see, scanning the bushes, hoping it wasn't a bear. As soon as I started looking around, the noises stopped, and it was eerily silent. No bird song, and even the wind had calmed down. I tried to relax, trying to get back to my Zen state, but I felt anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I decided to head back. It would take about a half an hour, I guessed, since it took an hour to climb up. I stood and scanned the trail above me once more, but nothing moved. I started my descent. Every few minutes, I would hear a twig snap or leaves rustle, and I would stop and wait, holding my breath and listening, but I would only be greeted by silence. I finally stopped and I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded pitifully anxious. I waited, but there was no reply. I knew I wasn't imagining it, though. Something was following me. My heart started beating fast, and I had this urge to run. I tried to calm myself down, but all I could think was, if it wasn't a person following me, then it had to be some sort of animal predator. I was so glad to see the cabin about 50 yards ahead that I broke into a dead run. Immediately, I then heard a snarling sound behind me, and my throat closed with fear. I knew instinctively that the animal that had been stalking me was now rushing to attack. I dropped my pack and I raced for the door, getting inside and sliding the bolt. I ran to the window to look out, and I could not believe my eyes. I've never seen anything like it. My heart started pounding so hard that it felt like my head would explode. The creature was frighteningly large, more than 6.5 feet tall, and it looked like a werewolf. I know that's ridiculous, but it was on 2 legs, and it had the head and the fur of a dog. It was barrel-chested, extremely muscular, with its front limbs hanging low, almost to its knees. I shrank back from the window, feeling so scared and sick like I was going to faint. I heard the long claws scrape at my wooden door, scratching and growling, and I slid down the walls, sitting on the floor, praying that the thing could not get in. I could hear it moving around the perimeter of the cabin next, and a horrible stench like a wet dog began to waft through the cracks in the logs. Suddenly, its head appeared in the window, and I got a good look at its face. It looked like a creature from hell. A dog's muzzle, large fangs like a wolf, glowing red eyes. It was peering in, trying to locate me in the inside of the cabin. I stayed still and quiet, frozen with fear, hoping it wasn't smart enough to break the glass. I could hear tearing noises as it found my backpack, and then silence. I waited a long, long time before moving, my legs going numb on the cabin floor. I was afraid to give away my location if it was just faking me out. Even though I was terrified, I made myself sidle over to the window eventually and look out. The thing was gone. My backpack was in shreds. It was almost evening, and I was too afraid to walk the short distance to where I was parked. So I stayed awake all night with the door bolted, afraid to even go out and use the outhouse. And then as soon as the full light of dawn broke, I made a run for it. Getting into my truck and heading back down the mountain, doors locked, stopping for no one. I haven't been back. I can't explain what I saw, but it has ruined my little cabin forever. I might buy a different place if this one sells, but it won't be in the Rockies. Amazon Rainforest, August of 2022. My name is Rosa, and I have an extraordinary tale to share about an encounter I had in the Amazon rainforest. I'd been on a research expedition with my team. It was a biannual event for us, and this year was the Amazon, and a humid afternoon the day that it happened. We had started our journey from a riverbank at the edge of the rainforest. I remember that the air was heavy and the sound of leaves and distant animal calls filled the air. We followed a narrow path that led us deeper into the heart of the rainforest. At one point, as we made our way through a dense part of the forest, my eyes were scanning everywhere. I was always on the lookout for any signs of rare species and anything out of the ordinary. But little did I know that I was about to encounter something truly extraordinary. With all of my enthusiasm, I was in the front and moving more quickly than the rest of the team, by quite a bit of distance. At one point, I reached a small clearing and I started walking to the center. While I was making my way there, I glanced across the clearing towards the trees on the other side. And suddenly, I froze in my tracks. Standing behind one of the trees about 50 feet away from me was a creature that resembled a large bird, but one that was covered in scales. It was enormous, and as I looked, I could see the face of a lizard in shiny green scales and a long, powerful set of wings. But its eyes were wide and curious, and it stood on 2 legs just like a human. At first, fear washed all over me and my body felt like it was glued to the ground. But as I studied the creature, I realized that it didn't seem aggressive or dangerous. In fact, it looked just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. The encounter lasted for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few minutes. We stood there, locked in a gaze as if trying to understand each other. As I stood there staring at the creature in awe and disbelief, I couldn't help but notice its immense size. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, towering over me like a giant. Its body was covered in thick, shiny green scales, which blended perfectly with the surrounding trees and foliage. Its powerful wings hung down by its sides, almost touching the ground. At first, my heart raced with fear. The stories I had heard about mythical creatures flashed through my mind. But as I observed the creature more closely, I noticed that it seemed to have a gentle expression in the large, almond-shaped eyes. I would say it seemed curious rather than threatening. It then took a step forward, cautiously closing the distance between us. I held my breath, unsure of how it would react. To my surprise, it didn't move any closer. Instead, it stood there, tilting its head slightly as if trying to understand my presence. Feeling a mixture of fear and fascination, I decided to take a small step backward, hoping to create some distance between us. To my relief, the creature mirrored my movement, showing no signs of aggression. It was as if it understood my intentions and didn't want to scare me away. We continued this slow dance, taking turns stepping back and observing each other. It was a surreal experience, like being part of a silent conversation between two beings from different worlds. Time seemed to stand still as we remained locked in our gaze. The rainforest around us was hushed, as if holding its breath, creating an atmosphere of enchantment and mystery. It almost felt like I'd entered a different realm, a place where mythical creatures live. Despite the fear lingering within me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy, though, also. I was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment that most people could only dream of. But as much as I wanted to stay and delve deeper into the encounter, a part of me knew it was time to retreat. With a final glance at the creature, I slowly turned around with my heart pounding in my chest, and I made my way back to where my team was still working their way through the forest. My mind racing with a mix of emotions. I couldn't wait to share my encounter with them, to describe in vivid detail what I had just experienced. Thinking about it, it felt like it had lasted an eternity, but it was probably only less than 5 minutes. I told them everything that happened. They could see the truth of it in my eyes. I know they could as I recounted every detail from the creature's appearance to our silent communication. The group listened intently, hanging on to every word, it seemed. Some were amazed, others remained skeptical. But then as a group, we all continued back to the clearing. But despite all of us looking around, we found no further signs of the creature. The rest of the day passed by in a blur, a mix of breathtaking scenery and laughter with my team. We concluded our journey as planned, reaching our campsite just as the sun began to set that day. And even though each member of the team emotionally had a different response to the encounter, it was still a reminder that there is the unknown lurking within the depths of the rainforest. We all agreed still that it was a day we would never forget. And for me, a day that had affected me deeper than I could have ever imagined. I can honestly say it changed all of my future research. I'm now much more open to things I didn't think I could understand. New Mexico Desert, 2015. Lilith, I've been a silent admirer of your channel for quite some time now. My buddies and I have this tradition where we share the most intriguing tales of the unexplained that we can find. More often than not, I find myself sharing a story I've picked up from your channel. So ultimately, while I would love to introduce you to them, I fear I'd lose my edge in our friendly competition. So forgive me, but I'm going to continue to quietly absorb your content and keep it to myself. I've never had a close encounter or anything like that, but I once had this run-in with a creature that set me on the path of the paranormal. I've shared this tale with many, only to be met with disbelief and accusations. I feel that's a testament to the ignorance of some people. I appreciate the platform you've created where experiences can be shared and understood without judgment. Anyway, my uncle owns a vast expanse of desert land here in New Mexico, about 100 acres. And over the years, we've created this epic dirt bike trail. It's got it all. Towering dunes, winding paths, a few jumps for the thrill seekers, and an endless sea of sand stretching as far as the eye can see. I find solace in the solitude of the desert. There's something about being alone in such a vast, barren landscape that brings peace. Anyway, a few years back, I was out riding late into the evening when I was hit by this foul stench. Now, we've had issues with illegal dumping on the property, so I assumed I was dealing with another pile of discarded waste. I veered off the trail, following the scent. It was putrid, nauseating, and it made my eyes water. The beam from my dirt bike's headlight illuminated this large creature feasting on a smaller one. I realized then that this was likely the source of the smell. As I approached, I saw that the attacking creature, though, was massive, unlike any animal that should be out in these parts, or any parts for that matter. It was easily 3 times the size of a large boar, but at the same time, it had these scales, like a reptile. Its eyes were enormous and terrifying. The creature locked eyes with me, dropped its meal, and then began to hiss menacingly. The sounds it made were chilling. It was a guttural hiss, but then there was something eerily human about it. It started off as a low, rumbling sound, followed by a high-pitched screech. I can't quite put it into words, but I have never heard anything like it. Not just in real life, but anywhere, movies included. Fear took a hold and I started to panic. I gunned it, weaving erratically and fishtailing it as I made my way back to the trail, with the creature's hissing noises echoing behind me. I eventually lost the sound and I made it back to the house safely. I then relayed the encounter to my uncle, who immediately grabbed his rifle and took me back into the desert. We found the remains of the creature's meal, but there was no sign of the beast itself. And what was odd was that the smaller creature was mostly untouched except for its stomach being ripped out, despite the size of the scaled beast that had been feasting on it. We checked all the trail cameras, but none had captured the creature. My uncle advised me to stay vigilant. I began researching what I had seen out there in the desert, and the closest match I could find was a creature from Australian Aboriginal mythology, known as the bunyip, described as a large creature with scales. It's also said to inhabit swamps, billabongs, creeks, riverbeds, and waterholes. Could this same creature have somehow found its way to the desert here in the U.S.? The thought of it was terrifying. I can't say with absolute certainty that what I saw was that creature, but it's the only thing I've come across in my research that aligns with my experience. I hope never to encounter it again, but my curiosity often gets the better of me. My uncle and I have installed additional trail cameras and motion lights along the trail in hopes of capturing evidence of the creature. So far, we've only captured coyotes, rabbits, and the occasional stray dog. But the added lighting does make night riding a lot more enjoyable. So perhaps I owe the creature some thanks. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. Your channel's been a source of validation for me, and I'm sure many others. There's something deeply human about wanting to believe in the existence of the unexplained, the paranormal. While it's possible that some people may misconstrue ordinary experiences as paranormal, it's equally impossible that all of these experiences are mere fabrications. I'm a believer, and I know I'm not alone. I was just a 25-year-old young man in 1965 with a seemingly simple job as a long-haul truck driver. My usual routine involved spending days and nights crossing vast distances, hauling freight across the country in my rig. Most of my nights I would spend reading, as I loved to read and learn anything and everything I could. This would come in handy to me, as you will soon learn. Over time, I witnessed a ton of strange oddities on the road, most of which I had been able to rationalize and forget. But one experience in Minnesota, in a little town that's now faded in my memory, managed to permanently imprint itself in my mind. A tale so strange that it shattered my perception of reality. This seemingly simple little place presented an unexpected mystery. The locals, tight-knit and familiar with each other, spoke in hushed whispers about strange occurrences in the nearby woods. Their stories painted vivid images of eerie lights radiating from the sky, a bizarre entity with enormous black eyes, and a skin texture resembling a reptile. Intrigued and unable to resist the unknown, my curiosity drove me to explore. Always the skeptic, I found it hard to fathom the existence of extraterrestrial beings. Yet a persistent, nagging feeling at the back of my mind convinced me that there might be something interesting about these reports. So I decided to put on my amateur detective hat and look deeper into these sightings in the town's surrounding woods. I ventured into the wilderness armed with only my truck's CB radio for company. And it wasn't long before the radio began to hum with unusual frequencies. The static-filled airwaves were guiding me deeper into the heart of the woods. And it was there, as I rounded a bend deep in the woods, that my skepticism crumbled. The creature stood before me, and it was exactly as it had been described. Small, human-like, with incredibly large, haunting black eyes, and this strange reptilian texture to its skin. It was crouched there off to the side next to a large rock, studying me as intently as I was studying it. There was a distinct curiosity in its gaze, and it seemed incredibly intrigued by me. And then before I could make sense of this crazy scene, this deafening hum filled the air and a blinding light came over everything. And just as soon as it appeared, the creature was now gone, leaving me staring at the empty spot now. The surreal encounter left me dazed, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. I made the conscious decision to not spread panic by sharing the encounter back in town. But yet I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had stumbled upon this crazy secret of colossal proportions. As I sat there looking out the windshield, I couldn't help but wonder what in the world just happened. I was a truck driver, not a government agent, not a scientist, certainly not equipped to unravel this crazy thing. And yet my memory of the counter was undeniably real. And forgetting about it was not an option. I chose to quietly return to town, holding the information close to me and maintaining ignorance about knowing anything about the event. But in my mind, I constantly replayed the encounter. So then after I finally left the town, the quiet nights on the road offered me the perfect opportunity for my research. I pored over books, articles, and reports on UFO sightings, alien encounters, and suspected government cover-ups. The more I learned, the more I was convinced of the craziness of my experience. It seemed I had inadvertently uncovered the actual secret that perhaps even the government wanted to bury. But what could a truck driver do about it? I recognized that my job, my stability, and possibly even my sanity were at risk if I were to step too far into this phenomenon. The alien encounter, although intriguing, was far beyond the scope of my ordinary life. So then I decided to just continue with my life. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, as the memory of it in Minnesota began to feel like a distant dream. I did go on driving my truck, crossing state lines, meeting new people, living the life of an ordinary truck driver. I began to regard that alien encounter as a personal secret, a unique adventure just for me. But yet it left this mark on my psyche that I couldn't ignore completely. Every unusual frequency on the radio, on the CB, every bright light in the sky, every mysterious story shared by a fellow trucker gave me this thrilling reminder of the secret that I held. In the end, I might just be a truck driver, but I'm also now this silent guardian of the secret, a living witness to an extraordinary event that questioned the understanding of the universe. Even now, as I drive on the deserted roads in the dead of night, no matter where I am, I find myself gazing at the expanse of the sky and wondering if somewhere out there, that creature is looking back at me.